One. What's going on, you loyal listeners? Thank you for tuning in to the L Squared podcast. I'm your host here, Luke Larson, and joining me today, as per the unusual, writer, director, producer of the new film How to Rob, Peter Horgan is on the show today. Thanks so much for joining me, man.
Thanks for having me.
So I've been very excited to sit down and talk with you, to give the loyal listeners a little background. So, friend of the show, Josh Koopman, good buddy of mine. Met him a couple years ago at the South Dakota Film Festival in 2019. He was there promoting the short film Put Your Feet Up, and the interview I did with him is still one of my favorites ever. Josh is a great guy, and you directed that film.
That's right. I wrote it too.
Wrote it. Yep.
Yeah.
And I've talked about it before, but it's just like one of the most interesting. It's really stuck with me over the years. And talking to Josh over that weekend and since, he always talked so highly of you and just said, Pete's like the guy that I would drop everything for to go work with, that I would work for free with, and just everything he says is just like, you're just such a special talent and you're gonna break through. And so he was telling me about working on this feature, and I was like, man, I cannot wait to sit down and talk to you. So I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks, man. Yeah, Coop's the man. He's genuinely one of the best people you'll ever meet in your life, and he's been such an amazing person to collaborate with, because we've done a couple films together. We did one prior to Put Your Feet Up, but even with that one, he was like, we weren't sure how it was going to go, and just like how people would receive it, because the subject matter makes some people uncomfortable, just talking about like different sexual preferences and stuff like that. And it ended up being like our most well-received film that we've done. It really resonated with people. And there was a lot of people who I didn't think would resonate with that came to me afterwards and said really encouraging things, and that it, really like struck a chord with them. So, we got to go make the feature version now, which is in development. We're working on that.
I would love that, man. I'm all in for a feature like Put Your Feet Up. And it's just so interesting. And it feels pretty risky taking on that kind of subject matter, but everybody kind of has had a similar reaction to it, where you're sort of like, at first it's sort of funny, like you kind of laugh because it's so uncomfortable and you think it's like kind of a joke. And then the more that goes on, you're like, this is kind of fucked up. And then you're like, oh, this is really interesting.
Yeah. And I guess for people, like, because I'm sure most people listening to this probably haven't watched Put Your Feet Up. It's essentially it's about a man with a unique fetish. He wants to be a footrest. That is like a sexual thing for him. And he meets a woman on Craigslist. He like puts up a post and meets this woman who's willing to do it with him. And he gets there to do it and finds out that she's writing a book about sexuality. She's asexual, and she wants to just interview him and talk about his sexuality. And it becomes this series of conversations between the two of them about why he wants to be a footrest. And it's something that, like I said, I think it makes certain people uncomfortable, but for me, I didn't even realize when I wrote that movie that there's this whole sex positivity movement. It wasn't until after I made the film that I found this, and I realized how much it coincides with that movement. But essentially, this is what I believe, and this is kind of what the movement is all about, is just that what you can't help what you like, as long as you're not harming anybody, as long as it's all consensual and it's happening between adults, then what's the problem? You should be able to live your life. And this man can't help that he wants to be a footrest. And a lot of people might look at him and call him all sorts of things, but like at the end of the day, like he can't help it. If it gives you joy and pleasure, then why not?
Right.
And if you're not hurting anybody, then why not?
Yeah.
So And that's what I think it did for people, is that, like, yeah, they came in. I watched it in theaters with people multiple times, and you're right. At the beginning, everyone's laughing, and and then by the end, they're not really anymore. By the end of the film, I had people coming up to me and being like, I don't think it's so strange wanting to be a footrest. And I was like, that's amazing that you came to that. So that like meant a lot to me.
Yeah.
So yeah, man, I'm glad that
it did. It's stuck with me, and it's a great, like, it's a good conversation starter, and to get people a door. But this new one, How to Rob, is a little bit more a bit easier to explain, I guess. But I'll just say, like, I loved it, and I'm so excited for it to come out, for people to see it. But can you kind of give us a little bit of a synopsis of what How to Rob's about?
Sure. I believe the log line that we have settled on after many attempts is it's a gritty Boston crime film about two stick-up guys whose lifelong bond is put to the test when they rob the wrong bookie.
Yep.
So it's a heist film in a way, but really, more than anything, I think it's a story about friendship, about brotherhood and loyalty, and about adult friendships and what happens when you start to drift from people you love later on in your life.
So what was the inspiration for you making this project?
There was different types of inspiration, because there is the financial inspiration of it, which is that, I've been writing feature films since I was probably like 17, 18 years old, and I've written a bunch of them, and no one's given me the money to make them. I just, I'm not connected like that. I'm still trying to make a name for myself in this industry. And Coop and I had attempted to get another feature that I wrote made a couple of years ago. And we did everything we could. We met with everyone who would take a meeting with us. We moved out to Los Angeles together.
Wow.
And we tried super, super hard, and it just didn't happen. And we couldn't get the backing that we were looking for. We couldn't get anything, really. So that experience, and just time, and just me getting older and still not having a feature under my belt, forced me to go and write a film where I gave myself a lot of limitations with writing. And I think it was a good thing that I had written so many features without limitations beforehand, where I wasn't worried about things like budget. But this time when I wrote How to Rob, I was writing it based around places, people, props that I knew I could get for cheap or for free. Like I was writing roles for actors who I had either worked with before or who I just knew personally, and I knew that they would come on board and take reduced rates or waive their fees. I was writing it for Massachusetts. I was born and raised here and stuff, and I knew I can get a bar, I can get a coffee shop, I can get as many houses and apartments as I need, because I got family and friends who will give it up to me for a day and let me come in and shoot in their house. And same thing with the props. We talked about a little bit before we started this, but there's some big kind of like set piece scenes in the film. One of them where there's like an arsenal of weapons. Like I knew I could get that. So that was part of the inspiration. And then the other part was just friendships that I've had with people throughout my life, and there's a couple in particular that I think really shine through in this film. But there was people in my life who I grew up with, who I love so much, and as we got older, we took different paths, and it was really, really hard to come to terms with that at first, because you just grow so loyal to people. And when you start to go in different directions, you start to question yourself and your loyalty. And at some points in my life, I had friends who were making, decisions and going certain routes that, were dangerous and that I didn't necessarily want to be around. And those were really tough decisions for me to make. So yeah, I think that influenced a lot of the dynamic between Jimmy and Sean, who are the main characters of the film. They're the two stick-up guys in the movie.
Yeah. And those relationships definitely come through, and that's for sure like the foundation of it. And I'm watching this, like, it's so good. And I'm not just saying that, like, I'm sitting there like, man, that's a great shot. Like, oh man, that's a great shot. And it's just very expertly crafted. So big kudos to you on that for sure. And
Thank you.
The friendships come through, and what I kept thinking was I was like, this gives me kind of like Friends of Eddie Coyle vibes, and a little bit of Michael Mann's Thief.
Actually, I love the Friends of Eddie Coyle.
I'm so psyched to talk to somebody about this. Let's go.
Dude, I live in Quincy right now. It's fun. Yeah. It's funny. So I live in Quincy, which is where a lot of the Friends of Eddie Coyle takes place. And there's a donut shop down the street from me, right next to my barber, called Donut King. And they just have like gourmet donuts. And I went to pick some up, my wife and me, this morning before we did this. And there was just a group of guys just hanging out at the counter, eating donuts, talking about the Friends of Eddie Coyle. Damn. And I so badly wanted to chime in. I was in line. I was just like, I'm about to like give these guys a bunch of like behind the scenes facts of the film. And then I'm like, these guys don't give a shit. I'm about to be like, do you know that book that it was based off of was written by a Boston attorney? And like, they just go look at me and be like, who the fuck is this kid? So I didn't. But dude, I love the Friends of Eddie Coyle. Someone turned me on to it a couple of years ago. They were like shocked when they heard that I hadn't watched it. And now I've seen it several times. Yeah. So this was that was definitely a huge influence. Thief, I watched prior to did I watch it prior to making this? I love Thief. I'm trying to remember, but I watched it fairly recently though. I'm trying to think. I may have actually watched it after we filmed this movie. But dude, James Caan is just incredible in that movie.
He really is.
And that's Michael Mann's
Michael Mann. Yeah. Yeah, I'm a huge Michael Mann, like, might be my favorite director.
He's definitely up there for me. Yeah, he's incredible. And I mean, he definitely influences me with all his other films, even though Thief was new to me within this last year. Yeah. But you know what's incredible to me beyond James Caan's performance in that is I love all the shots where they're like breaking into safes. Like it looks like they really did it. It looks like they really like got someone who could teach them how to like cut through safes and stuff. And those shots are just incredible.
They are. And what both those movies have in common, and what How to Rob, I think, made me think of these, is that it was just a time when, I mean, especially Friends of Eddie Coyle, when like, that's such a 70s crime movie. It's so great. But just like where they don't hold your hand, they don't sit down and explain every single little detail to you. And like, from a zoomed out perspective, like as you're going through it, it's cool. And you're like, I think I get what's going on. And then the end of it, you can kind of piece the things together on your own. And then you're like, oh shit. And it all of a sudden like makes so much sense, but when you're in it, it's harder to see,
Absolutely. And I remember I needed to watch The Friends of Eddie Coyle twice just to kind of fully grasp it, because you're right, they definitely don't hold your hand in that film. And that was kind of a balance that I had to think about a lot with How to Rob, is how much do I explain to the audience? And, you know, some people who watched earlier cuts of the film told me I was explaining too much still, and were like, you don't need that explanation. You don't need this. You don't need that.
Yeah.
And yeah, man, it's tough. That was, I would say that was like one of the challenges of the film is where to kind of cut that off, where to just let people figure it out. I feel like we do it a decent amount, like you're saying. And then there's other parts where I do feel like I had to explain things.
Yeah.
Like there was a moment, it's tough because, like, I mean, you've seen the movie, but it's not going to come out for a little while. But like, for instance, when Anthony and Benny D, like the hitmen, they're talking in the bar after they meet with Carlo. And they're talking about kind of like the politics, I guess, of like the Boston, you know, mafia. And like, so people are like, you cut that. People don't need that. And I'm just like, I think they do. You know, like, not everybody knows how this shit works. And like, it's just not like common knowledge. I read a lot about this stuff. I'm interested in this stuff. So I know if I cut it, I would be able to figure that out. But you know, it is a juggling act, I guess, trying to decide what to keep and to lose. I will say, interesting Eddie Coyle fact for you real quick.
Yes.
And you may already know some of this, but the murder that they do at the end at the Bruins game, supposedly there's a famous Boston gangster, John Materano, who had some dealings with Whitey Bulger back in the day. Like, if you watch Black Mass, he's a character in that film. They had some business together, and they killed some people together. And I guess Robert Mitchum and it's escaping me. Who directed Friends of Eddie Coyle? Oh, shit.
I'm pulling it up right now.
Peter Yates.
That sounds right. Yeah.
I think it's Peter Yates. They sat down with John Materano while they were filming, and they were like, hey, you know, we have this idea at the end of the movie. What would, you know, we got to kill this guy. Like, how would you guys do it? Apparently they gave him the idea about the Bruins game. Wow. And I don't know how true that is, but it's in a John Materano biography that I read.
Damn.
So that was interesting. And then I'm sure you probably know this, but Killing Them Softly is within the same world.
Yes.
Have that same character. The Peter Boyle character is played by Sam. Well, anyways, those. Yeah. Another great film. Another great gangster film.
Yeah. That gave me vibes of that one too, man.
Yeah.
And how is that? So, okay, like, for people, like, seriously go out and see Friends of Eddie Coyle, because it's so good. And like, one of my favorite movies of all time is Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy.
Oh my God, dude. Beautiful film.
Same reason. And it's like, that was one that there's only a couple movies that I've done this to, but when I finished watching it at the end credits, I immediately started it over again and just watched the whole thing through. And it's like, that's another one where they do not tell you shit. And then like, you have to keep watching it, and they do not like give, like, you really have to be invested and look into it. And there was just a different time when you could do that. And then also The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, which was in that same universe based on another book.
Yeah.
And that's another.
I haven't seen that one, but there's a couple films adapted from Jean Le Carre. There's that Philip Seymour Hoffman one, The Most Dangerous Man, I think. I think Tinker Tailor's the best.
Me too.
Yeah.
It's so good. And it's like, one of the things I hate, like, in filmmaking, especially recently, well, like, exposition's annoying, but also just especially voiceover is so cheap. Like, I hate to sound like adaptation here, you know, but honestly, God forgive you if you use fucking voiceover to just be like, hey, audience, this is what you need to know, and this is where I am, and this is what I'm thinking.
Well, I mean, I agree with you to a degree, because I mean, voiceover can be used to enhance something, like No Country for Old Men. You know, like Tommy Lee Jones's voiceover, that film he's not explaining anything. He's just, except for his like emotional state and kind of mental state at the time, which like really, I guess, solidifies the themes of that film.
The assassination of Jesse James, amazing voiceover.
Yeah, but I get what you mean. When you have to like, hey, you know, like just use it for exposition purely, then it's kind of lazy.
It is. And so like I'm just thinking about like what I talk about a lot with film is that film is just such, obviously, a visual medium and visual storytelling. And so being able to tell the story using images without having to insert that shit is so much more powerful, and like it should be utilized. So when you're writing it, you know, like you said, that was kind of some trouble you had with bringing it. How much of it do you write into the script? Like, do you have all that exposition written in the script, and then do you try and film it out of it, or how do you go about that?
Yes and no. I mean, sometimes it's I guess it's with How to Rob, I will say that How to Rob, I made the scenes a lot more dialogue heavy than I tend to do with my features. I'm usually way more about the visuals, but with this film, coming from just a money point, basically, the reason, like when we made Put Your Feet Up, we shot that movie for nothing. Like I literally, you know, granted I had it was a short film we shot on a weekend, and I just had a couple friends come and help me with it. But you know, we didn't pay for anything. We shot in one apartment, and it was two people talking. We did it for 2 days straight, and it was a 17-page script. And when I originally edited it, or with my editor, Cal Chacha, for that film, it was 27 minutes. You know, and like a lot of times people say that like 1 page usually equals about 1 minute of screen time. But that's not always true, depending on what's on the page exactly. So 17 pages translated to 27 minutes.
Sure.
And so for me, I was with How to Rob, I was thinking like, first off, we weren't expecting to get any money for this movie. This was going to be shot on weekends on my iPhone if I needed to. You know, I was just going to make this, you know, however I needed to make it. We ended up getting a little bit of money, but not much. And like really like pennies compared to any other, you know, film you see, even indie films. You're going to watch this film and you're going to think it cost us 20 times more than it actually did. We did this super, super cheap. But part of that was I was writing really long dialogue scenes intentionally because I was thinking about minimal locations and company moves and not having the entire crew needing to move around, because that was what was going to allow us to make this film possible.
Sure.
And not only that, but I had remembered from Put Your Feet Up that 17 pages of like pure dialogue, when it's naturally spoken and it's not done in this kind of like Aaron Sorkin, like really like fast paced sort of like, but when people are talking like they normally talk and they're taking pauses and things like that, I knew I could stretch this. So I was like, okay, well, if we have like a shorter script, we could still get a feature out of this if it's these long conversations. So, and I say all of that to come back to your question of like, I think I probably did have a little bit more exposition in here than I normally go for. And that was because I just had these people sitting in bars, sitting in coffee shops, talking to each other a lot longer than I usually do in my scripts.
Sure.
I think that there's a lot of times when you get on set and you're just like, you start filming a scene, you start having the actors go through it together, and you're just like, no, we don't need this anymore. You know, and I kind of like, I like to go in and to be able to cut it down there on the set, I guess, because, and sometimes it happens before you get to set. Sometimes it helps a lot when you have actors who are either writers or who just have really good storytelling instincts. Because, you know, Coop is one of those people. Josh Koopman and Chinaza Uche is one of those people, you know, like they would call me up we talked for months leading up to this film about their roles, about the script, and they would just call me up. Oh, does he really need to say this? This doesn't really make sense to me here. And they, and they would just talk. We would just talk it through, and be like, "You're right. Let's get rid of that." And or it would just happen on set. We'd have this conversation going. Do you really need to say that? Because we kind of mentioned it here before, and now it feels redundant. Yeah, never mind. Don't say that. So it's kind of figured out at all stages of production, because there was moments before we stepped on set where we chopped it down. There was moments on set in the moment where we were just like, nah, don't need it. And then of course you get into editing and you're like, oh yeah, I really don't need this. It's expressed here instead. So like I said, I personally feel like it's a healthy balance of explanation while also leaving a little bit up in the air. I think especially in like the second half of the film, there's a whole lot less explaining going on. I do think that in the beginning part, I tried to lay out the rules of the world a little bit more for those unfamiliar to it.
Yeah, for sure. It's kind of the Benicio del Toro method, where he's kind of infamous for directors sometimes get annoyed when he's got a page of dialogue and he's like, I can say this with my face. Like, I don't need, this is too many words, I
mean, that's Sicario right there, man.
Yeah, totally.
I never read the script of Sicario, so I don't know if there's one online that has his original lines in it. But I remember reading that he was just like, no, I don't need to say any of this.
Yeah.
I mean, his character in that film is brilliant. And
it's so good.
You wouldn't change a thing. And and now thinking about like, oh, you had all these like monologues and stuff, like, I'm so glad they didn't do that. And I think Taylor Sheridan is a brilliant writer. He's like one of my favorite writer directors out there today. And Denis Villeneuve, I mean, one of the best living directors. He's just incredible. So like, those are like three great storytellers right there between the three of those people. So I mean, of course, they came up with the best option. But yeah, man, love that film.
Yeah, it's so good. And like, there's just a way that, like it's, I guess it's hard to do, like, what I really appreciate in movies too is subtext. Even if you have a really chewy dialogue scene, when people are talking about something, but that's not actually what they're talking about, like that's, for me personally, that's really hard to write, but I love it so much when I see it, and I just, appreciate it so much, because you have to, it's kind of like you're doing like 3D chess, trying to be like, okay, well, they're saying this and they want you to think this, but really I'm saying this, and he knows that he's saying this, but he's actually saying that,
I mean, that's the best dialogue. It's, very few people just come out and say what they mean. Like
exactly.
Everyone has ulterior motives. And that's usually what's coming through in what they say. Just, in subtle ways.
So I asked Coop before we recorded this, I was like, do you have any questions you want me to ask Pete or anything? And just to sort of surprise you a little bit, he didn't have any questions, but he gave me some interesting factoids that I thought I'd run by.
I'm surprised you didn't come up with something to fuck with me.
I know, that's what I was that's what I was kind of hoping. What he has told me about this before, but so when you were 13, you spent your life savings on a ticket to go see Woods Hole Film Festival to hear this director talk. And he gave you some good advice. I would love to hear this story.
Oh yeah, man. So this is kind of, this isn't funny. He had it a little mixed up. I don't think I was 13 because I drove there. So I must have just got my license.
Okay.
And it was before, smartphones and stuff like that. And it was a hike for me to drive there. And like I'm like driving with like my printed out Google Maps or whatever the fuck, trying to find my way to Woods Hole Film Festival. And so this director, Sam Wiseman, he directed like George of the Jungle and one of like the Mighty Ducks sequels, and remember that David Spade movie, Dickie Roberts, Child Star. Yeah. So he had some gems under his filmography, and I probably paid like 100, $200 or something. I was a kid, you know, but I had a
Yeah.
job. I had a job when I was a kid. So I paid, you know, what was a lot of money to me to go hear this guy talk about directing.
Yeah.
And I was the youngest person in the room by like 15, 20 years easily. And that's just how I was as a kid. I was super obsessed with movies, and I knew I wanted to be a filmmaker, and I was making my own little short films with friends and family. So I was just real inquisitive. Anytime I saw any movie related thing, I was there, you know,
Yeah.
wherever it was. So I went and paid money to go see this guy talk. And he told some cool stories about being on set and everything, gave some
Mhm.
advice to like a room full of adults and me.
Right.
Excuse me. And then I go up to him at the end of it, and I was
What you
like,
think, like, just as listening to it, like, if I, if you're a big time director and you're doing another thing, and there's like one kid there who clearly like has, he's got wheat in his mouth, he's got big old eyes looking up at you. You're like, this is what you want, You're like, wow, I could really impart some wisdom on this kid.
yeah, I mean, that's what I would think
Yeah.
if the roles were reversed.
Yeah.
So I go up to him and I'm just like you said, I'm just like super excited. I'm talking to a Hollywood director. This is like the first person I've ever met in my life who's like connected to this world that I want to be a part of someday. And I ask him, you know, I'm a 16-year-old filmmaker. I want to be a director. I want to direct movies like you. What can I do? What should I be doing right now? Um, and without much thought, he said, find another career. And I was like, oh, because making movies with your friends is very different from doing this as a profession. It's not as fun as you think it is. Go find something else to do. And that was essentially it. And I was just like, oh, okay, thanks. And like, I looked at that moment in hindsight and was just kind of like, maybe that was him. Maybe this was like some moment where he thought like, oh, this kid really wants it. He'll keep going for it either way. Because
Yeah.
I'll tell you, when he said that to me, it meant nothing to me. I just thought
Sure.
like, no, I know I want to do this. You know, like
Yeah.
after he's kind of a dickhead. And I was just like, after that, I was like, I'm not, okay, this conversation's over. He clearly doesn't want to engage with me. So I
Yeah.
left. But like, I didn't go home and question my life and like, oh, I don't know if I should do this anymore because Sam Wiseman told me this isn't fun. You know, like
Yeah.
I was just like, no, this is what I want to do. So part of me looked back in hindsight and was like, maybe this guy just wanted to really like push me and see if I had it in me to keep going
Right.
for it. And I was like, no, fuck this guy. He like, I paid money. I paid money to come to your class. Isn't like clearly I'm interested. And
Yeah.
you decided that your gem of advice was going to be quit.
Yeah.
Like you could have at least given me some bullshit of like keep making your
Keep
movies,
doing
man.
it, man.
Keep doing what you're
Yeah.
doing. You know, like anything other than quit.
Yeah.
Like that was just a real shithead move on his.
Let's say like there's a 16-year-old listening to this episode, and he sees you and you just did your first feature, and you're scrappy and you make stuff, and you make great shit, man, and you're doing it. So like if the 16-year-old you is listening to this podcast, do you have any words of advice to give those listening?
Yeah, just fucking quit right now.
It's not worth it. This is not fun, guys.
This is worth it. Nah, I mean, yeah, I guess it would be the only way to be a filmmaker is to go out and make films, and the only way to be a writer is to go out and write. And this is a really, really difficult industry to break into. And what I tell people who I've like mentored in the past or who, you know, I'm teaching now as one of the things I'm doing. So I say this to my students as of now, is that this isn't an industry to try to get into because you want to get rich. Like if if making money is your ultimate goal in life, then there's so many better ways to go do it. You know, go be an engineer, go be a doctor, like go study STEM, you know, like there's so many easier paths to making money that are like sure things. This is not one of them. Like you can make a lot of money in this industry, don't get me wrong, but like very few people who, in comparison to like all the people who are going after it.
Yeah.
So the only way I think that you can mentally and emotionally survive trying to break into this industry, as someone like myself who, like, I didn't know anyone in Hollywood. I didn't know any filmmakers growing up. I grew up in Massachusetts and stuff, far, far away from any of that industry. And I also didn't have like money, you know, like I never had people just throwing money at me to go make my movies. I was always like saving up, buying a camera, shooting with my friends, just shooting like super low budget stuff. And like that basically is just that if you really want to do this, if you love this, if you love making movies, if you love telling stories, then do it. And like, and just keep doing it.
Yeah.
And eventually, you know, you get better and better, you start to find your audience. Yeah. And you might not ever get rich off of this, but if you love it, you love it. Like then you've lived a good life. If you make films your entire life and you loved making all those films, but you never got to make that like $100 million studio film, you still lived a good life because you know, you did what you wanted to do with it. And I think that the other advantage to starting out with no connections and no money when you're making movies is it forces you to learn these no budget filmmaking techniques because you have no other option. So like, that's why when I told you earlier, people who see How to Rob are going to think that we had significantly more money than we actually did. We did not have much, but people are going to think we had a lot. And that comes from years and years of building a team of like really great people and amazing storytellers within their own divisions of film, and also just practicing a lot with no money. So then when someone finally does give you $1, you know how to stretch it. And like that, you know, that was I think a lot of people who were new to working with us in this crew were kind of shocked with like how much we did in such a small amount of time. We shot 82 pages in 12 days. Wow. That is not normal, not for film, maybe for television, but for film, 82 pages in 12 days is not a lot. You know, I mean, I mean, it is a lot. It's a lot to shoot. And yeah, man, I mean, I wish I had more time. I wish I had more money, but I think we did a lot with what we had. Yeah. So that is my long-winded advice for 16-year-olds. And but yeah, man, who knows? Maybe that guy is a really solid guy, and he was just having an off day or so. But yeah, I don't know.
Well, man, he got to make the $100 million movies, and he still has that attitude, you know.
Yeah, and I mean, I gotta say, you know, if you're, I don't know, maybe those films didn't do it for him. Who knows? Right. Like, I have this goal of like, I want to make enough money to live a comfortable life. But I also always want to care about the feature I'm making. You know, like if I'm directing a feature film, regardless of the budget of it, I just want to care about it. You know, like if I got like called up to the big league someday and got to like do something Hollywood, like that would be awesome. You know, like I would be pumped to like make a bigger film. But I would need to care about it, you know, and I see people, and not to say that any of those films are bad films, but maybe something gives me the feeling that maybe like the Mighty Ducks 3 didn't speak to Sam Wiseman the same way that like How to Rob spoke to me. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited for the loyal listeners and everybody to be able to see How to Rob. And so where can they follow you to get updates, and when do you think people might be able to see it?
So it's tough to say. We're like just now starting to talk to potential distributors, but we like that we haven't even had the first meeting yet. That'll be in a couple weeks, and we're hoping to start premiering at festivals either this spring or summer. But the festival game, especially when you don't really have a name as a filmmaker yet, it's tough. You know, you submit to 30 and you hope to get into 3. It's really tough getting into festivals. They get a lot of materials sent to them. It's subjective, you know, just because you get denied doesn't mean you made a bad movie, but it might just not be the movie for that festival. So
they just happen to have like 3 or 4 Boston crime movies that year, and yours is the 5th one that came in. They're like, do we really need another one? Yeah.
Exactly. Or, you know, I've also heard from people, like with my shorts before, and it's rare. You usually, when you don't get into festivals, you just get a rejection letter. That's like the standard like mass email that they send to everybody. But I've actually was lucky enough early on I made a short film that was pretty dark drama about, you know, opiate addiction on the Cape. And I was able to talk to 2 different people from 2 different festivals who were like, oh yeah, your movie scored really well, but it was super dark. And they didn't want dark movies that year. You know, they didn't want anything like this. And you know, like, so that kind of stuff happens. So yeah, it's tough to say at this point. I would say as far as updates go, I'm gonna look at my Instagram now because I don't actually remember all this shit off the top of my head. But okay, so the Instagram is how-to-rob_movie. The Twitter page is how to rob movie, but the 2 is the number 2. Gotcha. If someone already took how to rob movie without the number 2. And then we have a YouTube channel as well, and the YouTube channel I think is just let's see. I think it's how
to rob movie.
Yeah. So like those 3 places would probably be the best. I'll definitely keep you posted, you know, and you could definitely, you know, I would love it if you know, let people know when that time comes. But we're hoping for spring release at a festival, spring or early summer maybe. And then as far as like a distributor goes, I just want this to get on a platform where the most people can see it. You know, for us, it's really about just the exposure and getting this out there and getting eyes on it, and hopefully getting people to have enough faith in us to help us find the financing for the follow-up film, the next one for this.
Oh yeah, well, I'll definitely put links to all that, and I'll link the trailer as well because that's out and it's great. But yeah, so make sure you follow all those and keep updated, and I'll keep you guys updated. And I'm excited for everybody to see it. You know, as always, you can follow me on Twitter at LukeLarson89. Find this podcast at L Squared Podcast, L2 Podcast on Facebook, or on Instagram, Twitter. We're on Spotify, YouTube. Check us out. Give us a follow. And yeah, until next time, Pete, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure.
Appreciate it. Thank you.